So my book is very much a study of place, a microhistory of migrant incarceration. And I selected El Centro, California as my case study, which if you're not familiar with the geography of California, is located about 2 hours east of San Diego in the Imperial Valley. And so I chose this location, even though initially I wanted to historicize all migrant detention camps, after learning that the El Centro Immigration Detention Camp had a very long history. It was in operation between 1945 and 2014. And so I decided to do a deeper dive to find out the history and the world of migrant incarceration on a more micro level. And so when I first started this research, I was fortunate to get a tour of the facility right before it closed down. And I actually didn't know that was going to happen. So I just got very lucky. And this happened in 2014. During my visit, immigration agents emphasized that the facility functioned, in their words, as a non-punitive administrative holding center for people awaiting civil non-criminal deportation proceedings. In fact, I write in my introduction that one of the agents described this facility as a haunted place where employees followed orders, and the facility was based on secrecy. We do not know why things are done the way they are, and we do not ask questions, she told me. So this was the very first time that I started to think about the history of migrant incarceration as both shadowy and as a ghost that continues to haunt our present. I use this thread to highlight the world of migrant incarceration in El Centro throughout the chapters. Some of my main takeaways from this research are that, one, the number of detention centers and the people held inside has increased during the last 75 years. Two, the federal government frames immigration detention as an administrative procedure, but detention centers operate very much like prisons, and I argue function to instruct, to discipline, to punish, and to manage migration. Three, that anti-migrant violence is central and has been central to the development and operation of migrant detention. Four, that thinking about the long history of migrant detention as a ghost that has lingered and haunted the US offers a new conceptualization of migrant incarceration. And lastly, that the history of migrant detention tells us several interlocking stories, such as the link between migrant detention and labor, the racial and gendered punishment of migrant bodies, the production of migrants as racial enemies within the context of national security, and migrant resistance in solidarity. So now I want to give you a brief snapshot of the contents of the book itself. I opened the Shadow of El Centro by narrating how the El Centro Immigration Detention Camp came to be. Centering World War II, national security fears, and labor, I uncover that the federal government simply transported the buildings used to hold Germans at the Fort Stanton camp in Nuevo Mexico and repurposed them in building the camp at El Centro. Using the free labor of unauthorized Mexican migrants, the El Centro camp opened in 1945 as unauthorized Mexican migrants. Migration increased at the start of the Bracero program, during which local INS patrol inspectors used detained migrants to labor in both the camp where they were imprisoned, as well as in their private homes and fields. However, incarcerated Mexican migrants responded to policing, confinement, and the extraction of their labor by collaborating, strategizing, and escaping from the camp as often as was possible. In the middle section of the book, I explore the expansion of immigration detention in the Greater Southwest after 1954. The detention and deportation regime expanded between the 1950s and the 1970s as immigration agents increased the policing of Mexican migrants along the US-Mexico border, and at the same time that Cold War logics increasingly racialized Mexicans as both subversive and criminal. During the 1970s, the demographics of the people held in El Centro shifted from predominantly Mexican to Latin American. The rates of Central American migrants, in particular, increased as they attempted to escape poverty, dictatorship, and civil war. This shift shaped the possibilities for resistance inside the El Centro Center, as seen in my discussion of the 1985 hunger strike, during which incarcerated migrants expressed what I call transnational migrant politics by demanding the INS listen to their grievances. The final section of the book centers more explicitly on anti-migrant violence by charting geographies of pain, such as guards' use of bathrooms and specific rooms to verbally and physically harm and punish migrants. Lastly, I memorialize migrant loss and death by centering the stories and voices of people lost to the detention and deportation regime. I conclude by pointing out that our current detention and deportation regime was not inevitable or accidental, but arose from a historical process that occurred over many decades. I invite readers to grapple with the hauntings or legacies that the system has left behind and encourage us to think about a future without cages.